Today we're diving into a story about a place that's becoming the hottest spot on a freezing planet. Greenland. It's more than just a massive white void on the map. While it's technically a self-governing territory of Denmark, it sits physically on the North American plate. But there's a bigger story hiding beneath the surface. For decades, the US treated this island as a secret playground for nuclear and military experiments, literally burying its darkest projects beneath the ice. So, when President Donald Trump repeatedly brings up the idea of buying Greenland, it's not just an eccentric real estate whim. To the people of Greenland, those words are a haunting reminder of a century of exploitation. It's a "here we go again" moment that triggers a deep historical trauma. We often view Greenland through a European lens, but its heart and soul belong to the Inuit. They are the indigenous people of the Arctic who have survived and thrived in these brutal conditions for thousands of years. You've likely heard the term Eskimo, but did you know why it's now considered derogatory? For a long time, it was believed to mean eaters of raw meat, a label used by neighboring tribes to describe them as primitive or savage. While linguists now debate that exact origin, the real problem is deeper. It's a name imposed on them by outsiders. To the people of the Arctic, it's a colonizer's word that strips away their true identity. They call themselves Inuit, which simply and powerfully means the people. To understand Greenland's struggle, you must first accept this fundamental truth. It was never an empty land waiting to be discovered by a European explorer. It was, and is, the ancestral home of a resilient civilization that saw the ice not as a hostile barrier, but as the very foundation of life itself. When we use their rightful name, we begin to acknowledge their sovereignty over a land that was stolen from them on paper. The European history of Greenland started with a lie. Around 1,000 years ago, a Viking named Eric the Red was exiled from both Norway and Iceland for murder. He sailed west and found this giant, ice-covered rock. To lure settlers to this frozen wasteland, he gave it a brilliant, albeit deceptive name: Greenland. It was the ultimate marketing scam. For a while, Norse settlers survived by hunting walruses and trading their precious ivory with European royalty. But as the climate grew colder during the Little Ice Age and trade routes collapsed, these settlements vanished into mystery, leaving the island to be forgotten by Europe for centuries. So how did a tiny country like Denmark end up owning the world's largest island? It wasn't because they loved the Arctic. It was a byproduct of European risk games and religious zeal. In 1721, a Danish-Norwegian missionary named Hans Egede arrived. He was looking for the lost Vikings to convert them back to the church. But when he found only Inuit instead, he didn't just leave. Instead, he stayed and became the Apostle of Greenland. But for the Inuit, he was the first architect of their colonization. Egede didn't just preach. He worked to dismantle the very core of Inuit culture. He saw their shamanistic traditions and spiritual connection to nature as devil worship, and spent years suppressing their ancestral rituals. By establishing a permanent mission, Egede created a foothold for Danish trade and governance. He treated the Inuit like children who needed to be civilized under the Danish crown. This wasn't just about religion. It was about branding the land as Danish territory by replacing indigenous laws and beliefs with European ones. Then, in 1814, after the Napoleonic Wars, the union between Denmark and Norway was severed. Norway was handed to Sweden, but because of the colonial infrastructure Egede had built, Greenland remained firmly under the Danish crown. Once again, the fate of the Inuit was decided in a smoky room in Europe without a single Greenlander present. By the 1940s, the US realized Greenland was the ultimate stationary aircraft carrier. Because it sits right at the top of the world, it was the shortest flight path for nuclear bombers to reach the Soviet Union. In 1946, the Truman administration offered Denmark $100 million in gold to buy the island. Denmark refused, but they signed a treaty allowing the US to build a massive military footprint, specifically the Tula Air Base. Greenland was now the front line of the Cold War, but the most dangerous part was kept hidden under the glaciers. In 1959, the US Army began a surreal project called Camp Century. Officially, it was a polar research station. The classified truth was Project Iceworm. The goal was to use Greenland's thick ice as a natural shield to hide 600 nuclear missiles from Soviet satellites. They carved a 2,500-mile network of tunnels so the missiles could be moved on rails, making them impossible to track. They even installed a portable nuclear reactor to power this secret city. But nature fought back. The glaciers moved faster than predicted, crushing the tunnels. The project was abandoned in 1967, but the US left behind radioactive coolant and toxic waste, assuming it would stay frozen forever. Now, as the climate warms, that toxic legacy is melting back into the ocean. The arrogance reached a peak in 1968. A US B-52 bomber carrying 4 hydrogen bombs crashed onto the sea ice near Thule. This was a broken arrow incident. Conventional explosives in the bombs detonated, spraying radioactive plutonium over the ice. The Inuit, who relied on that ice for hunting, were never fully warned of the risks. To this day, the distrust toward the US and Denmark remains a permanent scar on the Greenlandic psyche. While the US polluted the land, Denmark attacked the family unit. In 1951, 22 Inuit children were taken from their parents and sent to Denmark to be civilized. The goal was to create a new, pro-Danish elite. They were forbidden from speaking their native tongue. When they finally returned, they were strangers who couldn't even say, "I love you," to their own mothers, because they no longer shared a language. This wasn't a social experiment. It was a cold-blooded act of cultural genocide. In the 1960s, Denmark pushed the G60 policy, forcing Inuit families out of traditional hunting villages into soulless urban apartments. To ensure they couldn't return to their independent hunting life, authorities systematically slaughtered thousands of Inuit sled dogs. By killing the dogs, they killed the Inuits' ability to survive without the Danish state. Combined with the birthplace criterion, which legally paid Greenlanders less than Danes, they were turned into second-class citizens in their own home. The most intimate violation was the spiral scandal. Between 1966 and 1975, Danish doctors inserted IUDs into nearly half of all fertile Inuit women, about 4,500 people, often without their consent. Some were only 12 years old. The reason? Denmark wanted to limit the growing Inuit population to save on welfare costs. This forced sterilization campaign has left a generation of women traumatized, and they are only now taking the Danish government to court. Greenland's history is a dark map of imperial greed. Denmark tried to control their bodies and minds. The US used their land as a nuclear dumping ground. But the era of Greenland being a pawn is over. As the ice melts, it's not just water that's being released, it's the truth. Greenland is not a real estate asset for President Trump or any other leader to buy. Its future belongs to the Inuit people alone. Greenland is a warning. It shows what happens when superpowers treat indigenous people and the environment as disposable. Today, as global powers eye the island for its rare minerals and shipping lanes, we must remember the cost of the last century. Greenland is no longer a silent, frozen witness. It is speaking, and the world needs to listen before history repeats itself. Thank you for watching.